Hi everyone. Today we're going to work on sawing out some basic shapes to use for practice pieces to learn soldering. So we're going to be using a jeweler's saw frame. You will also need saw blades, jeweler's saw blades, a bench pin, and some metal. But the first thing I want to go over is your saw frame. Saw frames come in varying throat depths. Throat depth is the distance here. The blade's going to go here. So this distance from the blade to this edge of the frame is known as the throat depth. So they come in 4, 5, 6, and even 12-inch. When you're working on really large pieces of metal, the 12-inch is great. It's a little flexible, can be a little tricky to use. Typically a 5 or a 6-inch is probably the best throat depth. Bench pins, we have two types. We have this type with a wooden pin that comes out and a metal anvil that clamps on the edge of your bench or table. The pin has a flat side for sawing and an angled side for filing and emerying. So I'm going to use this one today, and I'm going to insert the pin with the flat side up. The other type you can get, this is a less expensive model, basically a board and a C-clamp. You could even make one of these. The clamp goes in the hole here and into that slot, and then clamps onto the side of your table or your bench, or I should say the edge of your table or bench. So first thing we really need to do is load the saw frame. And when you open up a dozen saw blades, this can be a little tricky. You have to unravel this wire and just unravel it enough to take out one blade. Otherwise you end up with blades all over the place. And I can just pull out one blade. I can barely see that. Next, you have to find the teeth, and it's really not that difficult. You probably can't see them. So what I usually do is I run my thumb up the blade. If my thumb just glides right over, then the teeth are facing in the wrong direction. So I'm going to flip this around. Now the teeth need to be facing out toward you and down. So if I run my thumb up the blade this way, the teeth are catching in my skin. So I know that's the right direction for those teeth. So I'm going to insert this into the frame. Now these two thumb screws, I'm going to loosen them because they're going to hold the saw blade. This thumb screw will adjust the size of this opening. I'm not going to need to adjust that quite yet. Now what's most important, again, is that those teeth are facing in the right direction. So I'm going to insert the bottom of the blade in between the frame and this washer, and then I'm going to tighten the thumb screw. I'd like to make sure it's a little straighter than that. Okay. And I'd like to have that opening just a little larger than the length of the blade. And that looks just about right. It might be a little too big. So I'm going to loosen this thumb screw, adjust the size of that opening, and then tighten that. Now here's the tricky part. You want to compress the frame while you're inserting the top of the blade between this washer and the frame. So I'm going to sit down to do this. And I'm going to put the edge of the frame on the edge of my table, and I'm going to push in with my body weight. This gets a little tricky if you're on a chair with wheels. You can also stand up and lean into your frame if you need to. So I have the end of the handle right on my breastbone, And I'm putting that end between the washer and the frame, tightening the thumb screw, and now I'm going to release. And this gives me a really nice, whoops, a little too taut. Maybe I need to make that just a little smaller, that opening. Okay, let's try this again. It happens once in a while. Okay, so that gives me a nice taut blade. If there's any slack in the blade, you won't saw straight and you'll break blades often. So you always want to make sure that that blade is nice and taut. Next step is to place my bench pin on my bench or table. So that's just going to clamp onto the edge. Oh, I need to move this over a little bit. Okay, now I have some sheet metal here. And the other items you're going to need are a scribe and maybe a straight edge or some type of a French curve to make curved cuts. I've lost my ruler. And you might want a Sharpie pen, and you can also we use Burr Life. It's a lubricant for the blades. Sometimes it makes sawing go a little smoother. You can also use beeswax. That works well. I use it sometimes. I don't use it all the time because I don't need it all the time. And sometimes I feel like it just clogs the teeth of the blade. So I'm not going to use it right now. Usually I'll use it on really small, fine things where the blade can get caught in the metal. I don't know if you can see the teeth. Probably not. I think the closer I get, the more it's just going to get blurry. But they're facing outward this way and down towards the handle of the frame. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is actually make some marks in the metal. I think I'm going to use this bench pin as a straight edge since I forgot to bring a ruler over. And we're going to mark the metal with a scribe, which means I'm going to scratch lines into the metal to follow with my saw. If I use a pen or a pencil, that's fine, but when I'm sawing, I'm going to have my hands all over the metal and usually end up wiping off the lines. Now, if you have difficulty seeing the scribe lines, little trick is you can take a Sharpie pen and just color where you're going to scribe. And then when that's dry, you can scribe right over it and your lines will show up really well. So I'm going to take my so-called straight edge. I'm just going to scribe. I'm going to cut this rectangle off the corner of this piece of copper. And I'm just going to scribe. And this is a purchased scribe. You can make scribes from a nail, a steel nail, or any pointed sharp tool will work. Now, when you start sawing, you want to sit back away from your bench pin. Make sure there's some space between you and the end of your bench pin. You want to keep your back straight, keep your shoulders down, and be relaxed.